Hello and welcome to this video on corporate culture. So when I say to you the word culture, what do you think of? Well, you might think of different nationalities and their cultures. And when you dig a little bit deeper, well, what do you mean by nationalities and cultures? You might come to the conclusion that a culture within nationality is certain values or certain assumptions that people within that country hold and abide by. And in this video, we're going to think about something similar. We're going to look at it from the perspective of a corporation. So we're going to look at business culture. So we're going to look at what that means. We're going to look at a way of classifying different cultures that a business might have and the work of Charles Handy, and then look at the different characteristics of those different cultures. So let's start off with what we mean by corporate culture. We mean the set of important assumptions that are shared by people working in a particular business and influence the ways in which decisions are taken. And a famous example of an organization, if you like, or a team with a very strong culture, an impressive culture, are the All Blacks, which is the highly successful New Zealand rugby team. So a couple of ways of thinking about culture. Culture is really the DNA of a business, kind of the gut instinct of a business, and the values and assumptions that are held deep down within the people who work in that business. Another way of thinking about culture is like an analogy with an aquarium. A culture cannot be manufactured, has to be gently nurtured by everyone from the CEO down. Ignoring the health of your culture is like letting the aquarium water get dirty. So it's something that's intrinsic to a business, but also needs to be monitored over time. So what will influence the culture of an organization? Well, here are some areas or things that might influence the culture of an organization. Let's pick out a few. So very important, number one there is often the founder or the leader of the organization. And culture is something, as we're going to look at later on, is quite difficult to change. And so the culture that the business gets started with tends to linger or tends to last. And so the founder, the original leader, tends to have quite an important influence on the culture. The size and the stage of the business can have an important impact on the culture. Is this a startup business, or is this one that's a huge global multinational that's been around for a long time? The leadership and management style, organizational structure, the reward structure of the business, the kind of market or industry in which it operates. Is it kind of a creative, innovative, new market, or is it pretty old, stable, saturated market? Maybe the working environment and the nature of the tasks can have an impact on the culture. Often the external environment and the kind of attitudes within the organization to risk-taking and innovation. So lots of things can impact on the culture. Now, why is culture important? Well, if culture is the DNA of the business, the fundamental assumptions and values that are held by the people working within the business, why is that important? Well, the fundamental values and assumptions are going to have an impact on how people perceive the brand. They're going to have an impact on the organizational structure and the communication within the business. It's going to have an impact on the level of innovation and creativity within the business. It's going to have an impact on motivation. It's going to impact on the strategy and the objectives that are chosen. It's going to impact on the way decisions are made. It's going to impact on a wide range of things. It's really, really important, the culture of any organization, and ultimately what impact will it have on how competitive the business is and how successful the business is. So it's really important that managers and businesses trying to understand their culture and nurture it where they can. Now, in business, we often talk about a business having a strong culture or a weak culture. So again, a famous example here of an organization, a sort of a team that is world renowned for its culture, is the All Blacks, the New Zealand rugby team. There's a picture of them on the top right hand side. And down here in the right hand corner, we have an extract from something that someone was found in their kind of documents as a team. And this really sets out what their culture is. And so some of this is a little bit rude, but it's a good illustration of their culture, and we can say that this is kind of characteristic of a strong culture. So drawing some parallels with business as a whole, What would we use to describe a strong culture? What terms might we use to describe? Well, the staff respond positively to the values of the business. There is a shared sense of responsibility towards the mission statement, the corporate aims and objectives. The workforce is motivated and loyal. We have talked about an efficient organization. People accept roles and responsibility willingly. They follow the policies within the business, and everyone buys into what the business is trying to do. Where this exists, we would say the business has a strong culture. On the flip side, we sometimes get businesses illustrated in this cartoon on the right hand side, which we might describe as having a weak culture. What does that mean from a business sense? The employees don't really align themselves with the values of the organization. They have to be forced to perform duties, require greater control and supervision. It's only really a job. The business struggles to retain the best staff, and staff don't support the objectives and the aims of the business. We would describe this as an organization with a weak culture. A business theorist called Charles Handy came up with further definitions of 4 different types of culture that might exist within a business: a power culture, a role culture, a task culture, and a person culture. Let's have a look at these 4 different classifications. Let's start off with a power culture. Now, a power culture is where control radiates from the center. So we have quite a centralized workforce. And so power concentrates among a few people. So there are few rules and little bureaucracy, little kind of forms of things, because the power is just associated with these people, which allows us to make swift decisions. So a little bit more on the power culture. Again, we said power is held by a few individuals, few rules and regulations. Those with power decide what is going to happen. So this can be, as a consequence, quite quick decision making, even if those interests aren't in the best long-term, even if those decisions aren't in the best long-term interest of the organization. A power culture is usually a strong culture that can quickly turn, toxic. We haven't got rules and regulations. We've just got a few powerful individuals. If they make bad decisions, it can lead to negative consequences for the business. So that'd be one type of culture. Another type of culture is a role culture, and this is where everyone has clearly delegated authorities within a highly defined structure. So we're talking about a very hierarchical business with lots of bureaucracy, so rules and regulations in place. So we haven't got powerful individuals. Everyone's power stems from their position. So we can't have these experts coming from outside with the power. The power relies on who is in that particular position to make that call. So what might be the implications for a role culture? Well, these are cultures that are based very much on rules rather than powerful individuals. Everyone knows in the organization what their roles and responsibilities are. So these are typically tall with long chains of command, these structures. As a consequence, decision making can often be quite slow, and the organization is less likely to take risks. So these cultures tend to be very bureaucratic. Now let's look at what we mean by a task culture. A task culture is very similar to a matrix organizational style of organization, and it's based around teams being formed to solve particular problems. So the power derives from your expertise, as long as within that team that expertise is required. So there's no single power source. It's not individuals or their roles, it's a matrix. So it depends on the nature of the teams. But then we have lots of different teams doing their different things, and there's a risk they might develop their own kind of agendas, their own objectives, and maybe not following the corporate objectives or corporate aims as a whole. So a bit more on task culture. Task culture forms when teams and organization are formed to address specific problems. The task is the important thing, so power within the team will often shift depending on the mix of team members, the status of the problem or the project. So whether this proves effective will be largely determined by how effective the teams are at working together. If the mix is right, this can be very productive and creative. This is not where we have power residing in a few individuals. It's not where people have their clear roles. It's where we use teams to address particular issues, and the teams have the power. The final one is an organization that has a person culture. And this is really where we have people believe themselves to be the most important part of the business and almost superior to the business. So this is maybe common in firms of things like accountants and lawyers, and the power really lies in the individuals. So we've got well-trained, highly qualified individuals who kind of operate in their own little bubbles. They're not in teams, but we maybe have an expert in a particular type of law over here, and we've got an expert in a particular type of law over here, and they're just kind of doing their own thing. And it's all about the person, the individual, rather than the business as a whole and the roles and the way it's organized. So individuals very much see themselves as unique little units and superior to the organization. It's more about them than the business as a whole. The organization is really there just as a sort of network to allow these individuals to coexist and work. And there's a link here between the different cultural types and what we might say is a suitable leadership style. So in a power culture, a business with a power culture, we might say that it's likely to have an autocratic leadership style. If it's a role culture, then it's more likely to maybe be paternalistic, although it could be autocratic to a certain extent. If it's a task culture, maybe it's more likely to be more democratic, but again, it could be paternalistic. Or if it's a person culture, it's perhaps more likely to be laissez-faire, but again, it could perhaps be democratic as well. So in this video, we've looked at what is meant by corporate culture, and we've looked at Charles Handy's 4 ways in which we can classify different types of culture. That's it. Thanks very much for listening.